I'll just start this up as is and let you let you have at it. I mean, if you could explain what you mean by the other end of the spectrum, though, that's kind of because we're rolling now.
Yeah, well, in terms of the spiritual end of it, or in terms of the more metaphysical, and I find that stuff more interesting, and mostly because most of my life I've been more material, more secular, atheist, agnostic type thing. With the people around me, they've mostly been spiritual, and my family and friends and stuff. So I've always kind of been on the outside of that discussion, and I often wonder if I'm missing out on things that certainly seem more interesting than just the material. I certainly have that tendency in later years.
But you're not seeing it just because you have no reason to get involved with spiritual type of thinking. It sounds.
Yeah, I don't know if I necessarily have a lack of reason. I find it very interesting. I find that the concept of just the material being all that there is, I find that kind of not so exciting. I guess maybe that's more of my eccentric and creative personality, perhaps kicking in there. I'm just more interested in what could be as opposed to what is.
Hmm. Well, were you raised in a religious household, or
I guess would be a better way to
say that again?
Yeah, Catholics. So Catholics.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, Catholic and Jewish, half Catholic, half Jew. So that's that's an interesting.
Maybe that was the temperament I was
things.
hearing. Maybe I was hearing a Jewish temperament. The kind of pause and start again, as if I could narrow that down to a like Jewish consideration, deep thought, kind of well paced.
Yeah, I haven't broke into any Yiddish yet, so we're still good.
Well, can you go into the Yiddish? Is that something that's rare for real?
No,
for
I
you?
wish.
Oh, okay. I was like, oh, okay. Well, shit. You never know
I
who
can do
you're
an
talking
okay
to.
Woody Allen.
Oh, by
Woody Allen.
by molesting 7-year-olds?
No, not that aspect of it.
Oh.
The neuroses and the sort of the New York Jewish accent. I can relate to some of that. I certainly have family that have that tendency, so it's interesting.
There you go.
Now the good Woody Allen stuff, the Woody that people used to know, not the more recent Woody that's been in the media with I guess we could say less than favorable transgressions.
Yeah, they're really hammering them now. Who knows what that'll turn into? That's a crappy legacy for him to have. This
Yeah, that
late in
kind
the
of sucks.
game.
I've always liked his books. His comedy books are quite funny. His movies are good, but I really like his literature. He's particularly funny in that because when you can sort of put your own imagery to the neuroses and the randomness, it's pretty funny.
I've never read any of them.
Yeah, I looked for that book. I think it's Without Feathers, and I think he wrote it in the '70s, and it's quite amusing. I find that's one of my favorite books.
Huh. Okay. Without Feathers. That sounds familiar. Was that not turned into a movie or?
I don't know if it was or not. I think a lot of the stuff that he did, I think he pulls snippets from his books and he puts it into the scripts. But the books tend to delve deeper into that weird the more experimental world where he can kind of get away with doing more on a typewriter than he would in film.
Oh.
Essentially, end his career. Sort of get the concentrate of that thinking.
Well, I don't really want to speculate about the dark side of Woody Allen because that would kind of ruin the thoughts that I've built up about the guy over the years. And so, damn that damn that woman unless she's not bullshitting for manipulating everyone's idea. But
yeah, it's interesting. I certainly hope that the allegations are true. That's for sure. That will certainly put a different perspective, a less favorable perspective on his legacy. That's for sure.
well, what I was thinking when I was listening to that guy's video and he was talking about fear, like everything is kind of a matter of fear. I had my recent discussion with Amendem. I was he was saying, "Oh, am I supposed to ram a post up my asshole or something to that effect?" And I was like, "Well, no, it's not like that. You got to be." I mean, I wasn't saying this to him because it didn't come to mind, but I talk about moving into doing absurd things, but there has to be some symbolic reason and some emotional appeal to doing something that is absurd, and then it's the removal of fear away from the suffering, and just doing it, and I keep thinking of people that are like tightrope walkers or mountain climbers that don't use any harnesses, and that kind of sense of fear where you have to just face the capability, or the possibility of bodily obliteration in a way, and get over that fear, and how I think that that's a route to spiritual growth is annihilating your fears or facing your fears and getting beyond them. And so I bring that up now because I just want people to relate more maybe to the idea of facing their fears. You have to go start a fight today. A fight, and then you gotta lose. You gotta lose that fight. I just love the Fight Club line about that.
Well, it touches a bit on why I joined the public speaking group about a year ago. Because that was one of the things I was extremely uncomfortable with, and I figured that was one way to sort of change my thinking and open the doors to other perspectives or other perspectives of myself or other aspects of myself that I was not just not grasping on my own.
Well, has it really paid off for you? Do you feel pretty good about it?
Yeah, I don't at the time. I mean, when I actually have to speak in front of the group and stuff, I certainly feel that pressure. But afterwards, there's a sort of there is a sort of buzz, a little bit of a high off of it that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise, essentially.
Yeah, I have a friend that's in a public speaking group called Toastmasters.
Yeah, That's the one I'm in.
Oh, right on. Well, I would like to see it in action. I haven't gone to any of them. She hasn't invited me to any of them. It seems like it's for the most part, a closed group. Everyone.
Well, I know the one art club. You can pretty much just show up any time as a guest. In fact, they encourage that. That's where I started off. I seen the ad in the paper and I figured that's something I normally wouldn't do, and that's a good way to go with it. It's just sort of do things that are totally out of the blue. My friend had brought it up and he said we should go and check this out. And at first I was thinking, I don't know. But that's the more I thought of it, the more I realized that's something I probably need to do.
Hmm. Well, do you feel like you're much more fluid now? Like, is this your fluid voice we're hearing, or?
I don't know. Maybe it's hard to sort of A/B it to what I was. Um, I think I'm more comfortable with doing it, whereas I wouldn't have been maybe a year ago. I wouldn't have even done this, like just basically talking at on mic. So I think it has changed many aspects of the way I think and the way that I interact with people. So I think it's been a plus. I certainly feel better talking in front of an audience or in front of a group now, whereas before it was was it Jerry Seinfeld that said most people would rather do a speech at a funeral than or rather be in the casket than give a speech at a funeral. I think there's a bit of truth to that. I know there certainly was for me. So kind of coming out of that shell has certainly been an interesting process. I wouldn't say that I'm anywhere near efficient or effective at it, but it certainly, I think, put me on the track to getting there.
Right on. Well, you sound pretty good now. I mean, minor hesitation, but I didn't know how you were before, so who am I to, I'm just going
Yeah, maybe
on.
there's less ands and ums and corrections and resets. I don't know. It'd be interesting. I should have done more recording of myself beforehand, just to see the difference. So I can sort of A/B it and see if there's been any improvement.
Yeah, they've
But
really been hammering her with all the ums and the filler words and stuff like that, but um, I I personally thought, wow, should be a minor, a minor thing to get over, kind of. I don't know. That's how I was looking at it, that it should be a minor thing to get over, but apparently not. Apparently, a lot of people are stuck on that.
yeah, that's a tricky one. Well, I think part of the problem is when you, especially when you're starting it, when you're uncomfortable with it, you don't really think about what you're saying or what you're doing as much as you'd like to, or you go the other way and you overanalyze. You start thinking about unnatural things, like when you're standing behind the lectern and you're thinking, "Oh, are they looking at my pinky finger twitching?" And you start having this bizarre neuroses almost, where you think people are paying closer attention than what they actually are. So that's where the ums and the ahs and the fillers start. Is you essentially try to smooth over that inner dialogue that's going on. That's not necessarily translating with the audience in any way. It just almost fabricated as a safety mechanism. I think humans are a tendency to not want to draw attention to themselves. It's safer to be in the background. So when you sort of put yourself out there as the center of attraction, you start picking up on all these, you start having all these little strange inner dialogues, like, did I say that word properly, or did I pronounce that properly, or did I just say an and or an or if there's a pause, you feel like you have to fill it with something immediately, otherwise you look awkward, and in the end you end up looking awkward because you're doing all these bizarre things. It's a strange process.
Well, I had a friend once who just put me at ease when I was really watching my words and what I was saying around him, and he's like, "Hey man, you're in good company, so just let her rip. It's no big deal." And that really helped me out. Just like, oh, he's not wrong. He is good company, and I'm not going to take anything I'm saying too extra seriously, and just let it out, just belt it out, just go. And that kind of got me over a hump at one point. Just
Yeah, I think that's one of the things is we try to we in a sense I guess we try to sound like ourselves. It's almost like we have to work at being ourselves for some weird reason.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's something.
Well, there's that self objectification You know, people objectify themselves, and then they think, you know, they have weird third person self perspective, instead of just letting it rip and kind of enjoying whatever the free flow is that comes out. I mean, I even pace myself because I want to make certain my thoughts are caught up with, you know, that they're on the tip of my tongue before I say them. But sometimes when I'm just speaking off the cuff, it actually, in retrospect, when I listen to my videos, I think I sound better than when I'm, you know, holding on to something.
Yeah, that's sort of the whole trick, is the natural you sort of shining through, as opposed to the more calculated, where you're thinking 3 steps ahead, essentially, of what you're going to say. Sometimes that's the tripping point, is when you get too far ahead of yourself. Then you start to go the other way. You start to look like you're uncomfortable or natural or strange, in a very strange sense. You try not to draw attention to yourself. That's essentially when you'll do something that will draw attention.
Well, have you felt any apprehension? You don't seem like you're apprehensive about talking to me right now. That's cool.
Oh yeah, not so much. So much. I feel pretty good. I think it's mostly just talking from groups that really, that's where I really feel the crunch of it. This is pretty comfortable. And when I'm at one of the meetings and look, give a speech or open a meeting or something, then I feel that strange self-analytical process kind of take over. In a sense, I sort of like it. I've started to get addicted to that. It's pretty bizarre way that it's a, you know, it's a self-healing thing or something.
Yeah,
It's right.
of feeding on your own previous fears. That's gonna be kind of
Yeah,
nice.
I kind of went through that with roller coasters when I was a kid. I was terrified of really, oh, many ridiculous things, but roller coasters being one of them. My father took me on when I was small, and I was petrified. The worst experiences of my life. It was just terrifying. And then a few years later, I started to get the bug to go on them, and then now I'm an addict. That's really, whenever I get a chance to go to amusement parks, it's one of my favorite things. So in a sense, it's related to that sort of, that's euphoria. It's a very strange sort of inner process where you feel like you're conquering something. It's a buzz.
Yeah, that sounds great. It'd be nice to go on a roller coaster right about now. I fed on them when I was a kid. I loved them. There was one kid that was just absolutely terrified of them, and he would walk off bawling after we would spend, you know, 15 minutes trying to get him on and get him in line and get him right to the front, and then right when it came time to get on, he would just start crying and he'd run off, and I don't know how he's doing as an adult now, but it was just interesting to be around that personality type.
Yeah, that sounds almost familiar. It almost feels like I was similar to that. I wouldn't go as far to try and carry on, but I remember my father. It was this ride. It was like a pirate ship type thing, just a rock back and forth. Pretty common type ride, and I remember looking at it, and I thought it was a good idea at first. I thought it would be fun. Then as we got into line and we got closer and closer to the ride, and I heard the mechanics of it, the gears and stuff, and I started thinking, maybe this isn't such a good idea. And when it got to the point where we're right about to get on the ride, I basically copped out right at that moment and said, no, I don't want to do this. I remember after about like 40 minutes of standing in line, my father just sort of ushering me off the ride. We basically walked right across it and at the gate. So I think he's always brought that up as something that really annoyed him.
Yeah, well, that's a hell of a memory to have with your dad, I think, but
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, he was never upset about it or anything, but he brings it up from time to time, especially when I'm getting ready to go to a amusement park or something and kind of fill him in on the details, and he's, oh, yeah, I remember when you wouldn't go on that pirate ship. Remember that? And it's like, yeah. You remind me every time.
So is it your dad that's Jewish and your mom Catholic, or the other way around?
Well, they're both Catholic. My great grandfather was Jewish, so it's a little further in the lineage. It's not as front and center, but
I
it's
see.
something that's it's always been kind of the undertone of a lot of that sort of stuff. I mean, neither of my folks were particularly religious or strict about that. You know, growing up, I used to have to go to church. That was one thing that I used to dread, and it was like the bring kicking and screaming. I absolutely hated going there and hated that process. But then, as I reached my early teen years, they sort of they got a little more lenient with that. I guess they figured it was a hopeless endeavor.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I grew up around a lot of Mormon kids, and every Sunday I'd see them march off to church, and I'd be playing in the yard or doing yard work or something like that, and they'd come back and change in their clothes and start playing and come over and hang out and stuff like that, and it was just always weird to always see them march off, and then kind of a I'm excluded from their group sort of sensation, or just kind of indifference, just kind of like, oh, that's what they do sort of thing. So it was a peculiar time for me.
Yeah, I had a little bit of that. Yeah, it's interesting. The sort of in groups, when you're part of the out group, is you somehow get to take that in by osmosis. It's interesting.
Uh-huh. Yeah, some of
It's
the.
funny because there was a lot of things I. Sorry.
Oh no, go ahead. I was. You can go ahead.
Okay, I thought we jammed up there. I thought these things were getting choppy all of a sudden there. Yeah, there was a lot of things with the church that I used to actually enjoy. A lot of people think that, oh, you're just atheist because you don't like to go to church or you don't like this. And that really wasn't so much the case. I mean, I never had any particularly bad experiences. A lot of the times I reflect on those things and I quite enjoyed them. But it was basically just the weekly time to put your sweater on and dress pants and go there. That's really, I think the biggest fiasco was pretty much just getting me there. But once I was there, I guess I was sort of cooperative at least.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't remember anything that was particularly unpleasant about it, I guess I could say.
Yeah, yeah. I was just gonna say that the people that I knew that I grew up with, anytime they want to get together as kind of a group function, they always say, well, let's have it here at this Mormon church, and I always, I felt excluded then, and I feel less excluded now, but there's still that idea like, well, hey, why do you guys have to have it at your church? And I realize it's a huge sense of community for them, and so they're just used to it, but I don't know, it just seems unsensitive to the outsider, but I'd be more apt to go into something like that now if they held one again. But Yeah, the in-group, out-group thing is really
And we don't.
interesting.
Yeah, I wonder if a lot of that's almost intentional. That's the sort of that's the bait, is to get you to want to feel that sense of community and not feel isolated. Maybe that's one of the underlying principles of it, is to get people into it that way, where they enjoy the community end of it and those sorts of aspects of it.
Well, I didn't feel like they were trying to convert me or anything, but just that more of that it was a nostalgic thing for them to go and do the church thing because they have a sense of community with it already. But
I don't know much about Mormons and stuff. We don't have a lot of them around here, so it's kind of alien to me. But I see them the odd time they come up to they'll come to my front door and with the usual literature and presentation, and that's pretty much my only interaction with that world. I really don't know a whole lot about it.
well, you probably have to invite them in and investigate it if they showed up, if you had any interest to it. But
It would just be interesting to have that discussion. I think maybe that's something I should do is next time. Sort of engage that dialogue more as opposed to sort of brushing it off as a something that's irritating me. Maybe I should
right.
engage that sort of dialogue more often. Maybe it'd be more fruitful to go about it that way.
Well, their immediate trick is just to get you to read the book. Like, just read our book. Once you read our book, then you pray at the end and ask if it's true, and if it's true, then you call us back and we'll help you baptize into the church, and that's kind of their routine there. So, but you could read the books that they have without them coming to your door is what I was getting at. If you felt like you wanted religion as a staple in your day-to-day diet of living.
Well, it's not something that I'm disposed to, that particular urge.
Right.
I'm interested in the spiritual end of it, but in terms of the organized religion end of it, I find that less interesting, I guess.
Right. Sure. Sure.
The sort of, I guess, the pre-packaged spiritualism. It's always the way I've sort of seen those things, is just we've got it all tied up in a neat bow. So I'm more interested in the chaotic approach to it, I guess, if anything. I mean, when I have that sort of tendency or that sort of thinking, for some reason, I like the more chaotic approach to it. In a sense, I don't know if that makes any sense, but
Well, I was just going to ask, like, what do you mean by chaotic? Just non-structured, you know?
less structured. Yeah, it's not as here's the book, here's the outline, here's the narrative, here's the tenets. Just more off the cuff. I find that more interesting. The sort of lockstep spiritualism, I think that's kind of dull. I mean, I grew up with that stuff, and it just never really connected in any way.
Right, right.
Whereas the more, I guess, free-spirited spiritualism, I guess, I don't know. I don't even know how to really summarize it, but I find that more interesting and probably more on par with something. If that additional realm is out there, then it's something a little more interesting than how it's been framed thus far.
And that's why you subscribe to me.
Yeah, I like the chaos.
Oh.
I like the approach to it. I think it's more, there's something more organic about it. There's more of a sincerity to it.
Well, I definitely wanted to tie philosophy into it somehow because I didn't want it just free floating and out there and completely nonsensical, even though it might be read as that way regardless of my thoughts on it.
Yeah, it's kind of a hard thing to put structure to. I mean, just from what I've heard about your particular experiences, it's kind of hard to put something to that, I would imagine.
Yeah, yeah. That's why I kept falling back into solipsism and personal experience, and then having to try to format it and saying, okay, over here we have naturalism and science and the grounded way about it, and then but where I'm coming from was more of an intuitive, emotional, very very exacting sort of symbolic pull against me, and so yeah, it was definitely different than a regular. I'm no Bible thumper by any means, but I don't know
Yeah,
how to describe it.
I never got that impression.
Yeah,
Certainly never. I certainly didn't pick up that tone. What you're expressing.
yeah,
It's more organic and just something that's completely different than the usual summary of those types of experiences or what those experiences are attributed to. And it's kind of interesting to see that process and
but
see you kind of flesh it out and try to put, I guess, give it a floor in a sense.
yeah, yeah. Well said. Well said. I just assumed I would be ostracized to extreme limits, but it's interesting that I haven't been, and that I still get people viewing or whatnot. But for the most part, people still don't know what to say about it, and I haven't, besides Gary, I don't really have too many people attempting to argue with me in any way, and I'm not even certain how to go about an argument. I have to paint a portrait of myself to give people a kind of a basis in order to create arguments against me or on my behalf. But I really did think I would be ostracized, so it's interesting that you, kind of from the old guard of YouTube, would show up and still find me worthwhile to talk to.
Yeah, it's new. It's something that's fresh. I mean, if you look at what YouTube has sort of degenerated to over the years, it's kind of become dull. And it's a lot of the same arguments, and there's a real sense of partisanship with things that I find kind of something about that just doesn't resonate with me. I've always liked guys like Ben and Carruth who indulge things in a more intuitive way and approach things in a made better dialogue of it, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, yeah, he was really a good feed back in the day, and I like his movie and what he's done. But yeah, he always had a good, just kind of a creeping sort of easy to listen to but well nuanced voice about everything that he was getting at. Like make certain he was. I don't know, like he was polishing a sculpture or something like that when he talked.
Yeah, I got that sense too. And the fact that you couldn't just put him into a box and say, well, this is where he fits in also was interesting because at times you really didn't know where he was coming from with a lot of things. You kind of got a sense of it, but then he'd make another video and just sort of almost intentionally take down that type of complacency and make you think a little harder about what it is he's presenting. I always like that.
Hmm. Well, were you invited into the Knighted Owl group, or did you know about that group, or?
I'm a part of it on Facebook, I guess. I'm a member of it anyway. I really wasn't active on YouTube when that stuff was going on. I mean, I was watching the videos and uh, sort of participating from the outside, but on a much smaller scale. Certainly not enough to to interact, and maybe that was part of my public speaking thing.
I
Maybe that
gotcha.
was part of my hang-up, because when I look back on that, I certainly wish I was more involved in that time. Kind of a cherry time for YouTube. That was my favorite period. Everybody was always doing something interesting. There was an ongoing dialogue, and it was cool. I
Yeah.
guess I took it for granted. I just figured that was always going to be around, and eventually I'll chime in, but it kind of dissolved before there was a chance to do that.
Well, that's why I'm wondering if yeah, I mean, even Conference Report had talking about the end of community on YouTube, and I was just thinking about that. Like, yeah, it really was kind of an end of this initial accepting people rawly as they came, and not very kind of a lack of structure, but a more of an openness towards all sorts of different personalities. Where now things are cliquish, and the monetized corporate sort of wowie approach is really, I think it's taken people like I imagine you were, kind of on the fence just with their speaking ability, even people that can speak well, and it casts them back and has them so they're like, well, I don't want to prove that I'm not popular, by going on YouTube and proving that I'm not popular. So I think a lot of people shy away from it. And I'm not saying you, I'm just saying I feel like that's some approach that's going on, something that's keeping people away from getting on YouTube.
Yeah, there is almost a corporate vibe about it now. I think the problem is everybody wants to be the next TJ or the next, whoever's who else is big in that community. And they don't really think so much about dialogue. It's become more about video production and video hits, and reaching a wide audience. And I think in that sort of transition, we've lost the meat of it. We've lost the dialogue and the sort of casualness there was to it. You look at a video Ben did in 2006 or 2007. If somebody were to make that same video today, I wonder if it would get any views at all. Essentially.
Hmm. Yeah, or maybe it would be more of a viral sensation. That's what I would hope, is some super popular YouTuber would do some really heady sort of philosophical uh, thing, and TJ being, he's probably one of the more philosophical, and I think he's pretty bad at it.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a sort of tendency to stay away from being heady. I think it's more like the script writer's approach, the sort of filmmaking machine approach, where if you present a script that's too esoteric or too artsy or too cinema verite, people will look at it and producers will say, no, there's no market for that. I think that sort of thinking might have sort of seeped its way into the YouTube community and into the just people's consciousness in general. Maybe
Yeah, marketing consciousness. Wow.
it's hard to sell iPads on you know discussions of cancer. Like it's I think, well, I guess another sign of the times is we have a big book franchise here, a bookstore franchise. It's Chapters. It's like I guess it'd be like a Barnes and Noble or something in the States, like a big franchise type
Right.
outfit. And the sort of teen literature that the books are practically pouring at the door. And if you go to the philosophy section, you can count a handful of books, and the books that are in there are pretty kind of kitschy. It's almost like the crib notes of the classic authors, and it's just not particularly friendly to that sort of literature or that
Oh,
sort of culture.
I see. I see. Yeah. Well,
I don't know if it's the same there, but that's something I've noticed here. Even the religion section, which I was kind of surprised. I figured, especially with a lot of this sort of new age type thinking that's gotten more popular over the years, we'd see even more of that. But even that's kind of um, Nietzsche. It's very limited. So most of the stuff that people are reading, if they read it all, seems to be, if you don't write a novel about vampires or teen vampires, then it's not going to get put to print. That seems to be the trend, at least.
Yeah, that's a sad state of affairs right there.
Yeah, you'd be hard pressed to find a Henry Miller or something along those lines nowadays. It's a shame.
Well, and I
I
think
guess
things are going to become worldwide. Like there's going to be a worldwide book that's just going to come out and it'll show up on everyone's Kindle and people will read it and they'll talk about it and then they'll make a movie out of it and then the next book will come out and it'll just start cycling down this marketing machine and this travesty of this sort of way. I don't know. I always hope there's esoterics in the world that have to go out of their way and read books that nobody else is reading.
I think a lot of people do. I think what's the usual thing was you've got a certain majority or a certain marketable majority. And I guess I could use something I'm more experienced with is in film. You get, let's say, horror movies, for example. That's one of my favorite genres. You look at the sort of mainstream horror clique, and that's kind of its own thing. It's a big market, but when you look at the older horror movies or the more cult classic type things, the stuff that producers usually shy away from or think is unsellable, there's a huge market. Like people that like the older stuff tend to really, really like it and they stick with it, or as opposed to the stuff that gets mass produced, sort of goes through the food chain, and once it's done, pretty much vanishes into some obscure corner of film history. Doesn't have the staying power.
Yeah.
So I think there's always going to be people that are interested in that stuff. They're just going to have to work a little harder to find the artists and writers and filmmakers and musicians that do that.
Yeah. Well, I'm haunted by some musicians and some music. It really, really hits to the core sometimes. Not to argue in Anton's favor, but just recently I've noticed that they don't bring me to tears as much as it's like, wow, I didn't want to hear that, but I guess I'm listening to it anyway. Just really, really bluesy rock, or rock with a dark tune to it. I don't know.
Yeah,
I was gonna say I was just recently listening to the Red Hot Chili Peppers and really getting into their lyrics, and they kind of scarred me in a negative way. Like, wow, I had no idea they were saying such dark things. Just like I didn't pull it together. I didn't synthesize the meaning in my head.
yeah, it's interesting. The interpretations are certainly, even to more commercial artists, some of it's pretty clever. And occasionally you'll get one that'll slip something in there that's a little more interesting than the usual sort of flock of um, Katy Perry's and Justin Bieber's and that particular market of music.
Mm-hmm. Well, so what is it that you design most of the time? Like, where's your main bread and butter? Is it in music then?
Mostly post-production film, whether it's editing or effects stuff and music. Sometimes I'll like on really small productions, I'll sometimes take on 1 or 2 roles. Like I'll do color timing and music and those sorts of things, where I try to essentially get more work out of the deal than I normally would. Because
Oh.
when it rains, it's got to pour.
Well, is that good money coming your way when you get a gig like that, or is it kind of still pretty spotty, or?
It's okay. It's not great. I'm okay with it, but I certainly do have to do other things. I have to take on painting jobs and carpentry jobs and stuff,
I gotcha.
sort of in between.
I gotcha.
Yeah, the arts are not always the great source of money, but they're certainly the things I find most rewarding. I almost wish that financial end of it is kind of a frustrating portion of it, because that wasn't tied to it as much. It would certainly be more rewarding in a sense. If I was well off, just pretty much focus on doing the things I want to do with art, as opposed to having to sort of conform to other ideas or work on projects that I don't find particularly interesting. So it'd be kind of nice to have that freedom, but I haven't been particularly fortunate in that aspect. A couple of things I've really liked, but most of it I'm kind of on the fence with. Yeah, I probably wouldn't encourage people that want to make a lot of money. I wouldn't say the arts are really the sort of venue to do that. I mean, there's some people that obviously do really well, but I think it's a tough thing to put bread on the table with. And I think in many aspects, if somebody were to ask me, kind of in hindsight, if somebody were to say, well, I really love film, I'd love to get involved with that. And my sort of, it's my initial response to that, or my first thing I'm inclined to tell them is, if you really like film, make film, but don't tie it into a financial thing. Do something else, because once those two worlds kind of converge, there's something that gets lost in that process, and it's not as rewarding. That's my take on it, anyway.
So
unless you're working by. Sorry.
Well, it just sounds like you've lost a certain zest, or you lose a zest if you tie the project into something else. Where, I mean, there wouldn't be a project if there wasn't somebody somewhere having a passion for it, and so it would be like you losing your passion for somebody else's project that you're working on. It sounds like.
Yeah, I struggle with that a little bit. That's one of the things. That's one of the pitfalls, I guess, of working on something that you have the skills to finish the job, but at the same time, you're not particularly thrilled with it, and you have to kind of go to a different place, or it's kind of hard to explain, but in terms of the creative process, you sort of stop thinking like yourself and you start thinking like somebody else. Like, what would so and so do on this? Because usually, well, most of the time, there's a sort of reference that comes with those jobs. Like, I want something that's like this, or can you do something that's like this? Or it's not so much like, here you go, here's an open canvas. It's more of a, here's an open canvas, but it's not so open type deal. So it's artistically frustrating. But at the same time, there's a structure to that that's sometimes good as well, and there's other rewards. I do like working with other people. That's certainly a fruitful venture most of the time. And there's a certain discipline to it. Whereas if I was doing, say I was doing a score for a short film that I put together, I might be more pedantic, and schedules and that sort of stuff might become more of an issue. The sort of discipline to get it done without somebody kind of saying, hey, we expect this by a certain day. So there's there's strengths and weaknesses to it, for sure.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I don't know if you do any pro bono work or if you're out of that kind of realm, but there's.
I tried putting together a couple YouTube videos where I was kind of experimenting with that stuff, and YouTube was gonna sort of be the I guess the sandbox, the place where I can kind of put different stuff up and different ideas up and just see how they fly and see, just experiment with new techniques or learn something. So YouTube was going to be the sandbox, but of course, I haven't been as active in that process as I'd like to be. That's for sure.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, that sounds like a bit of a bummer, because I don't know. I mean, if you got a knack for it, who knows how that could fly. But I thought maybe YouTube would be like a way for you to get more jobs or something like that. When you
Yeah,
say
maybe.
sandbox.
I've never really considered it for networking in that sort of sense. I'm kind of lucky because I'm part of a group, and we have a producer that pretty much gets the work, so I don't have to work too hard at necessarily finding the work. I'm kind of lucky in that sense, but the other end of it, you kind of get what comes down the pipe. So it's a double-edged sword. It's nice to have somebody feeding you the work, but at the same time, it's a bit the projects themselves might not be the most thrilling things or artistically exciting things.
Right, right.
The best stuff that I've got in my experience, the stuff I've had the most fun with has actually been the commercials, especially the ones that are low budget, where they pretty much want you to pull something off that's slick while being very financially conservative. And those have turned out to be fun because you get a little more leeway. In a sense, I guess it's because you can hold the client almost. You could kind of say, well, hey, look, you're getting a good deal on this, and that's the ticket. It's if you want something that's going to be creative and broadcast quality, you got to open that canvas up a bit. So, but with the jobs, like when you get bigger contracts with bigger lawyers, you don't have as much you don't have as much creativity, I guess.
Oh, wow.
To pull that tactic. But yeah, the little commercials have been the most fun.
And you're doing the musical scores on those for the most part.
On some of them, a lot of color timing or special effects compositing or putting titles or title sequences and that sort of stuff. A lot of that type of thing. A lot of stuff with text, which I kind of like. I enjoy that format.
Yeah, that sounds great. That sounds like a good gig.
Yeah, when the work's there, it's great. One of my favorite things to do is the opening and ending credits of films, because I get to do the music and then do the accompanying the graphic stuff. So that's really a fun thing. I'm one of those strange guys that gets excited about opening sequences of movies, the title sequence. Because usually for me, after that, that's when the script and the rest of the production I start to get picky with it and disappointed in the end a lot of times.
I see. Yeah, I'm having my brother. He does some title sequencing and internet commercials, and he uses Premiere as a software. He uses 3D Studio, not 3D Studio Max, but 3D Cinema, I guess it's called. Maybe it's 4D
Oh,
Cinema.
Cinema 4D.
Yeah, and he does some things in that, and that's what when I think about getting into 3D design, I think get Cinema 4D, because apparently they did that Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs movie on Cinema 4D, and I thought, wow, that was a fabulous animation there, and it seemed like a really user-friendly program also.
Yeah, I haven't used it a lot myself, but I've had sort of crossover things where I've seen people using it, and it's really, really interesting. It looks like a good piece of software. I'd certainly like to explore that as well.
Yeah, a little more high end than Blender. Blender was always confusing for me because it was the dots, the buttons to use it were always so small, and I couldn't get the interface just seemed difficult for me to comprehend where everything was. I didn't feel guided by the directionality of where my hand was or anything in that respect. Like it just didn't. The interface wasn't intuitive for me on Blender, and maybe it's
Yeah,
changed, but
that was always one of its shortcomings was the confusing interface of it. Although if you try a more recent version, they've certainly cleaned that up a lot and catered more to the 3D Studio and Cinema 4D type type of users, because I think they wanted to essentially make that a more usable piece of software. Because yeah, I mean, I remember even just maybe 3 or 4 years ago, the interface on it was just a disaster. It was just really badly designed and confusing and just not intuitive at all, really.
hmm.
That's definitely the benefit of the better programs for sure, is the interface is a lot neater. It's gotten better. Certainly, it's taken steps. They revamped the entire look of the program a couple of years ago, and it's on the right track, but it still has a ways to go. That's for sure. At least for guys like me, I don't want to focus too much on the mechanics of the program. I want to focus on what it is I'm doing with it.
Right, exactly. That's why I thought if there was anything that was really user friendly, where you just kind of intuitively knew where the tools were and how to use them, and you could just start knocking out the projects. I mean, I fuddled around with Maya for a while, and that seemed as if that was the most in-depth program as far as being able to get stuff done, and I started to understand the user face quite a bit. But but
The other catch to that type of work is not even so much the tools themselves; it's the rendering time. Some of the some of the rendering in those things is just horrific. I remember I did one project. I was really excited about it, and I started rendering it out, and it literally, I remember one image, because it renders it out by frames, and I remember one frame taking like 3 hours to render, and I was just, wow. You're looking at a 40-second sequence, and you're thinking, boy, that's going to tie up some resources real quick.
oh, my cat's starting to get in the way. He's starting to climb on the keyboard. I think I'll wrap this video up because it's been about an hour actually we've been chatting. Let me go ahead and click it. Click.